Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hi there, and welcome back to another edition of the Consulting Success Podcast. Joining Michael on the show today is Matt Hayter. Matt is the CEO and founder of ProjectWorks, a comprehensive business management platform designed specifically for professionals and creative service businesses. Under his leadership, ProjectWorks has aided business owners, including consultants, by enhancing their capabilities in project management, people management, and their financials. As you'll hear in today's episode with Matt and Michael, many consultants struggle to grow their businesses because they're too busy working in their businesses rather than on their businesses. Many consultants really have no idea what's going on, and this is one of the biggest hurdles they face when trying to grow from 6 figures to 7 figures. If you're a consultant eager to scale your business from the 6-figure level to the 7-figure mark, remember, you don't have to shoulder this burden alone. We're here to assist you. We're currently offering a free consulting blueprint as your roadmap to transition from 6 to 7 figures. Just go ahead and visit consultingsuccess.com/guide. Again, that's consultingsuccess.com/guide to claim your free copy today. Now, during today's episode, Matt will discuss with you margins and why it's important to know and understand your margins if you're looking to grow your firm. As a professional consultant, understanding and knowing your margin is crucial for a number of reasons. First, it serves as an indicator of your business's financial health. Secondly, it informs pricing strategies. And thirdly, it can help you in making strategic business decisions. For example, if you see that a specific service has a high margin, you may want to focus more on promoting that service. Or if a particular project has a low margin, you might reconsider whether it's worth continuing or whether you need to renegotiate the terms of that deal. In essence, understanding your margin is essential in ensuring the sustainability and growth of your consulting practice. Now, along with margin, Matt and Michael dive into a number of different and interesting topics to help you improve and grow your consulting business. Here to share with you his insights and expertise is Matt Hayter. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Matt Hayter. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So Matt, you are the CEO, you're a founder at ProjectWorks, which is a business management platform for professionals and creative service businesses. Many of these people are in the world of consulting or something similar. So this will be a very relevant conversation for everybody joining us. And I thought where we could start is before you actually created this software as a service, a SaaS business, you were actually part of a consulting business. So I'd love if you could just kind of take us back to what was that consulting business? What were you doing? Because I know you spent about a decade or so there. I'd love to just kind of set the stage of what was that consulting business all about? And then as you kind of just walk us through that a little bit, why did you decide to stop the traditional consulting kind of route that you were on and instead begin building software?
Sure, absolutely. That's a good question. What was I doing there? I guess to frame that up a little bit. So this was a technology consultancy, so largely doing big software platforms, government, banking, big bespoke solutions. So I have always been a geek and into tech. And then I decided, what I need to do is I need to go to university and get a business degree because it's actually business is going to be more important. Tinkering with computers and software is one thing, but I need to do that. So I went off and got a degree in business. And then at the end of that, when I was deciding what to do from a career perspective, I kind of realized business ideas were a dime a dozen. I mean, it was really all about execution and being able to build something. So I decided I need to get a job as a developer to learn to properly build stuff. So I managed to convince the guys at this consultancy to take me on as a graduate developer. And the first sort of 4 or 5 years there, I spent just kind of working up through to senior developer and to being a team lead. And then I sort of started circling back to the business side, got into kind of solution architecture. And this was kind of naturally happening.
Sure.
And then sort of ultimately became what we called a technical account manager, which meant I was leading the account largely for one of this company, Provoke Solutions' biggest customer. So that was kind of what I was doing in the consulting world.
Got it. Yeah.
So being a software company, at this point, it was sort of over 100 consultants. We had built internally a product that was called Project Control at the time to basically run Provoke as a business. So this was a product that did timesheeting, resource planning, revenue forecasting, invoicing, expenses, kind of all of that stuff that you need to run a consultancy. And it had a big kind of emphasis on utilization and margin, which are really the two things that consultants care about the most. Well, margin, am I making money and am I people doing stuff? It's really, that's what a consultant cares about. So we kind of built up this product. People were coming and going from Provoke, mainly sort of project managers or managers, and saying, hey, you need to take this product you've built to the company we just came from. Like they really need that. They've been looking for years for this. There's nothing on the market that does this. They're currently running a cobbled together set of spreadsheets. I think they've got a time tracking tool. And then to do any margin reporting, we have to wait till after the month's finished. And then there's about a week of pulling reports together. And then we find out if we made any money last month.
Sorry to interrupt, Matt. So just to clarify and make sure I'm catching this. So kind of in summary, this consulting firm that you were working at previously was called Provoke. You had built or been part of building this internal tool or software that helped you to really track margins and utilization of the firm. And then people like new consultants, kind of employees that would come into Provoke would look at this software and go like, wow, this were the places that we came from before could have really benefited from this, or we've never seen something like this, but I know there's a need for it. So you were starting to kind of get some validation. There was at that point, no plan from what I understand in terms of commercializing this software. It was just an internal tool, but you're starting to get some validation or at least a level of interest from people that come into your company from other consulting firms. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. There'd been no formal validation, just seeds were starting to be sown.
Yeah.
We should do something with this. So that's exactly right. So we got to the point after having a number of these conversations that myself and my business partner, Julian, who I'd been working with, not one of the founders there, we want to go and start our own business. We've been here a while. We kind of feel like we know what we're doing. Let's start something. And then we got talking to Doug and some of the other directors and founders at Provoke and sort of said, hey, we kind of want to go and do this. You guys have got this asset already that we think has a lot of value. Maybe we should chat about spinning that out as a product and we could do that instead.
So, how do they respond to that? How do they feel about that idea?
Yeah, it took a little while, probably not because they were opposed to the idea, but because it's like in a consultancy, you've got a million things going on and nice to haves are often not at the top of the list. So I was probably perseverant to the point of being quite annoying. And
how long did it take from the time that you had that initial conversation, kind of floated the idea to the point where they agreed and said, okay, whatever that next step was?
This probably happened over a period of, so what happened was it had been kind of informal chats with them individually for a while. And then over a period of maybe 6 to 12 months, those got more formal. And then we got invited along to a board meeting with a proper proposal on what to do. And then the proposal was accepted in the board meeting. And what that said was, okay, we've got this internal asset now. We're going to create a new company, which is going to be a vehicle for the IP. That we're going to transfer the ownership of the IP to this new entity. And then Provoke are going to retain 50% or just over 50% of the equity in this entity. And then myself and my business partner, Julian, get the other 50%. And we are going to work in our own time to start building this product into a proper SaaS platform, because that was the other part of it, right? It had been built. This was 2016. It had been built as an old on-premise bespoke solution.
Right,
so
not in the cloud.
Needed to be productized, exactly.
Sure. Okay.
So we started doing that nights and weekends, and then gradually just sort of started shifting some of our time across to working on the product build itself, because we were...
How did you feel about that? So they're saying, 50%, you guys get that, but if you're going to do this, you need to do this on your own time. Essentially, we still need you working inside of the consulting firm. Whereas that sounded like you were just ready and willing to take on. Did you feel like you needed some form of extra compensation, or just how did you kind of like, what was going through your mind when you were dealing with that or making that decision to to move forward in that structure?
We were lucky in the sense that we'd known these guys for a long time and we had a high trust kind of relationship with them. So this enabled us to do, because myself and Julian were really integral to this major account, and just walking away would have left the book in a really vulnerable position. So we were like, hey, we're going to stay and look after you guys, but this is where we want to be. So what it enabled us to do was just sort of slowly transition out and start spending. So it started off with all our time outside, but very quickly it started becoming, we can spend time from within our workday. And I think we got Julian to completely switch over first. And then I switched over completely 2019, so 3 years after we were founded, which is when we did a funding round.
And when you say that you switched over, what were you looking for? What needed to be in place in order for you guys to feel comfortable to make that switch? Was it a certain amount of traction in the market, client wins, revenue? What were kind of the metrics that you were looking at to feel confident, and also for this consulting firm Provoke to say, you have our blessing to kind of go off and get into this and now full time?
Yeah, well, that's the honest story. It's a bit of luck what actually happened. So the plan was we'd get it to the point where revenue was at enough of a point where we could properly transition out, and we would just bootstrap it and grow it organically. In hindsight, without proper capitalization, it wouldn't have anywhere near as successful as it has been. So what actually happened was in 2019, Provoke sold entirely outright to a private equity firm. So the private equity firm came along and realized that they had acquired this random asset. Doug, who was one of the founders at Provoke and my now business partner, we got on a plane, went and met Masood, who's the CEO of the PE firm, spent a weekend with him in a room and spreadsheets, and sort of figured out what we were going to do with this thing. So we didn't know if we were going to be shut down or what was going to happen. It was a period of a lot of uncertainty for us.
Right.
Luckily, we convinced him that it was a good idea. I think a little bit because we kind of clearly knew what we were doing. We had a good plan, but Masood was a consulting guy. He'd built his first business to a company that actually ended up being listed, and that's where they made their initial money off consulting. He got in as a product guy too, saw the product. Wish I had this when I was running my 1,000-person consultancy. Right. Okay. And then funded the business there and then. So in hindsight, that was a really good forcing function. Bootstrapping it was going to be, probably still would have been successful, but for the magnitude and the breadth of the product we were trying to take on, we really needed proper capital.
And how do you feel about that? I mean, so you're giving up, I guess, more equity to have this kind of investment or cash infusion. So less of it, potentially that might mean you have less kind of say or control on the future or the destiny of the business. How did you wrestle with that? Or just like, what was your mindset around, I'm going to own less of this, but I'm going to do it because I see a benefit of taking on this capital, opposed to maybe owning more, but not having that capital? What did that conversation look like in your mind?
Yeah, and that's a difficult one, and something that we kind of maybe not wrestled with, but you have to kind of go through and get comfortable with, right? Yeah. So we could see the size of the market. Ended up doing some work formally with Forrester to do some addressable market sizing. And so we could see the opportunity. And the alternative for us at that point in time, was that we were likely to be shut down. They had the controlling stake that could have done whatever they liked. And we'd already invested like a lot of sweat into building this. So we were probably more emotionally invested than we should have been. It's worked out fine, but that would have played into that decision making as well. So that would be a lesson to do this again, just to check how emotionally invested you are in these things. But ultimately, we kind of realized that without proper funding, we weren't going to grow at the speed you need a SaaS company to grow to get a valuation, because especially at that time, moved a little bit more to being valued off being profitable and EBITDA now, but still SaaS companies are largely valued off growth, and bootstrapping it was not going to get us the growth that commanded the valuation that was going to make the numbers work for us.
Makes sense. So I want to get deeper into kind of how you've gone about growing this business. But before we do that, I know that the core premise or the real value driver inside of this business is the ideas you talked around margins and utilization in consulting businesses. And it kind of goes beyond that. And I'd love you to share a little bit more about what it is doing. But when it comes to margins, just because you've been in that space for quite a bit of time, both in the consulting world, kind of seeing what things look like inside a consulting business, but now also from the software perspective, I would imagine that you have insight to a lot of data from a lot of different firms. What do you see are some of the main mistakes that consultants or other professional service firms make when it comes to margins, and whether it's failure to improve margins? What stands out in your mind of the kind of those common issues that creep up for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the things that is maybe not common, but I didn't foresee, is that some people don't want to know the actual reality of their business. They would rather just keep trucking along with their head in the sand that they don't necessarily have a particularly good business because they don't want to be told that.
What does that look like? Could you maybe just offer an example? Like, where do you see that play out, that kind of scenario?
So a reasonably common scenario for us, right, is that businesses that don't have really clear visibility of margin, and when I'm talking margin, I'm talking about generally being able to look at the margin on individual projects, on individual people, and then that rolled up to business functions, say a team, and then looking at overall business margin. And one of those can be good without the other. So you need to be looking at it from all of these angles, right?
Right, sure.
The scenario we have reasonably common is project that's got all the kind of fanfare, all the are excited about it. This is a really cool, fun project that's been worked on. And when you dig into it, they're often making really terrible margins. Yeah. There's a reason why those projects are doing so well. They're stacked with high-paid consultants who you're making very little margin off. That's why they're on time and on budget. And it's often the bread and butter kind of boring stuff that ticks over where you're making your higher margins. So it's been really good and some interesting conversations for us to be able to show people margin from any angle and be like, this kind of work that you're doing, you don't make much money off. And there's always this is like a loss leader type project. We're breaking into this market. It's like, well, there's a loss leader and you're breaking into this market when you've been doing these projects for 5 years and you're still making the same margin. Yeah. Whereas this stuff you've been doing for 5 years as well, you've been making good margin since day one. Maybe you should sort of focus on, is there a way you can build that business? Do you want to? Some people who run consultancies, they run consultancies because they enjoy what they do and they want to run it as a lifestyle type business. They enjoy the flexibility from that. That's absolutely fine as well. I think the important thing is being really honest with yourself around what you're trying to get out of your consultancy firm. Mm-hmm. If it is just money, then focus on the stuff that makes you money. If it's not, then that's fine.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
I've found, with many clients over the years that we've worked with, in some cases, they just never done it. Like they've never really taken, so they might have an idea, hopefully they do, around what their overall kind of business margin is, right? How much they're actually profiting and so forth. But as you talked about, Matt, such an important area is like looking at what is the profitability by type of project or type of engagement? What is the profitability by client? And we've seen situations where consulting firm we worked with, they kind of treated everyone they worked with as the same. And when we started to get them to do a bit of this kind of analysis, they figured out that pretty quickly, the vast majority of their business was actually coming from a very specific type of client, and their messaging wasn't speaking to that client. Like they hadn't even seen that. And that was like a light bulb moment. So I think a tool like this, a software like this that makes it easier for people to get that kind of data is important. And it's your choice what you do with the data, but at least to have it so that you can know what's really going on. So that's a great example. And what about utilization? I think this is an area that for many consultants, they don't even think about unless they start getting to that level where they have a bigger team, more consultants working or associates or junior consultants and so forth. But what have you seen in utilization in terms of kind of big missteps or mistakes or maybe areas of opportunity that most people don't really lean into, but they should?
Yeah, you're spot on. This usually becomes more of an issue at around 20 sort of staff, 15, 20. You kind of touched on it as well. Like a lot of these people haven't done it before. We've actually been talking about a campaign just like centered around the accidental business owner. Mm-hmm. A lot of our customers are consultants, 20 people. They've never set out to run a business. They were just really good at what they did. And before they know it, they've got 20 other people with them who are doing the same stuff. They've never thought really of, okay, I'm going to build a company and do this and that. It's just like, I'm a consultant. I've got too much work. Get some more people to help me. And then before they know it, just sort of struggling to figure out what all these people are doing. So to bring back to your kind of question around utilization, at this size, absolutely, that's where it gets more important. It's easy to run a single project successfully, right? And have good margin and that to look good. You can run a series of very good projects and still not have a very good business if your utilization is poor. So utilization is really the other part of it. If I've got...
Sorry to interrupt, Matt. Could you maybe just define how you think about utilization for maybe those that aren't that familiar with the term or maybe don't really understand it? How should they think about the term utilization?
Absolutely, yeah. So utilization is basically the amount of time you're spending on billable work, right? So say a standard person has a 40-hour work week. They would typically have a utilization target. I think industry, it depends where you are in the business, right? Like an individual contributor would have a target. Probably at least 80% of their time should be billable, maybe up to sort of 90. We've seen for a contractor, it's usually 100%. Typically, we see that sort of 80 to 90% of the time that you're paid for, you should be working on client work. And the other 10% is maybe internal meetings, admin type stuff. That generally reduces as you get up more to management. Like a manager of a function, their utilization target might be 50% because they are doing recruitment, team management, all of that kind of stuff is general management stuff as well.
Yeah.
So the flip side to that, or the other part of that, is the more senior you are in the business, often you're bringing in more revenue, you have higher rates, but often you get paid more too. So rates is a big important part to margin, but we'll put that rates part in a box for now. Yeah. So what happens with utilization is you can be running a really great project, but if people are spending a lot of time on internal time, they're still being paid for every hour that they're at your company. So it doesn't really matter if you're running the odd good project if people have nothing to do. So you need to be making good margin on your projects and having people a utilization level that works for you.
Right.
And a big part of managing utilization is properly managing like your pipeline of work that's coming down. I mean, every consultancy, it's either you've got too much or not enough work to do, right?
It's very hard to be like, in that perfect level.
That's the name of the game you're in. You know, you've got no work. You sign a massive deal, and then how are we going to staff this thing? That's just the life cycle of being in consulting. So the better you can plan through like tooling and having visibility and out as far as you can, like booking people in, looking what that sort of means in terms of revenue forecasting coming in, and then having all your costs together, you can start getting an idea of projected margin too. So that's where that utilization piece becomes really important. Right. Ultimately, it's about margin, but utilization is a key kind of building block into that.
I think it's great that you also just touched on the value of doing this, where it helps you to plan for the future, because for so many consultants start building a bigger firm, having enough talent or having enough kind of people on the bench, part of it that they can tap into and allowing them to be more proactive in planning or arranging if they're going to need more people for an upcoming project becomes really valuable. You talked about kind of this magic number of 20. At 20 people, this is where a lot of this stuff becomes really valuable. When you look at just across all of your customer base, have you seen smaller firms, let's say that have 5 people or 8 people or 10 people as part of the company, still get value from a software like this or doing these types of best practices? Or do you really see that it only makes sense to think about going deeper into these areas when you get to 20 people or more?
We still see value for sure. It's just that at a 5-person firm, there's less places to hide when it comes to utilization. Usually a 5-person firm is run still by the owner and they know what everybody's kind of doing. We try not to take companies onto our platform that are less than 10 staff, because that's when our value like really kicks in. But we do have some businesses who are smaller. Regardless of what size you are, being able to project your margin is a really valuable asset, because what you can do is you can go into, there are other products that do this, maybe not as well as ProjectWorks, but there are other products. Yeah. You go in, you're looking at a piece of work, you can go and resource it out of the schedule, put in all your forecasts and say, we're going to bring in this much revenue. And then that's going to spit out and tell you, because it's got all costs loaded in there too, that's going to tell you the projected margin that you're going to make even before a project starts. That enables you to do is to know how much movement you have when it comes to pricing that project. So you could go in and plan it out and say, actually, this is quite bread and butter stuff. We can put some of our level or our more junior people on it. And it's still really value add, because we've done this a bunch of times where the experts in it charge a high rate for this. So we're going to make a lot of margin. And then you can go in, if you're in pricing discussions and you're getting asked to sort of sharpen the pencil, you know how much room exactly you have to move. You're not having to sort of think on the fly as you're being negotiated down. You have your number. Okay, this is our bid. And often being able to take that number, our clients taking that number to their clients when they're being pushed, their clients can really appreciate that. They can go back and say, hey, we can't do it for less than that. We need to be making 30% margin on a project to actually cover our costs and be doing 10% margin as a business, which is sort of roughly where they land. And that transparency can actually help them in the sell in some cases as well. Some of their clients might not care.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see again, because you have so much access to data across many different clients and customers? What do you view kind of as the industry averages for margin? And I'm wondering, do you look at it based on, is there a certain average that just kind of, again, seems to be the average based on when you have X number of employees, or is it more by industry? Tell me kind of how you view different margins and what is average, what is high, what is low. I'd love to get some insight from you on that.
It varies a lot. I would say
that's not the answer I want,
Matt. I'll start with that and then I'll break it down. I think the biggest impact on like the higher margins is generally more the higher the specialization of the consultancy. And the higher the specialization, often the smaller the consultancy, right? So we might, with a really small consultancy of very specialized people at what they do, there's not necessarily the market out there for their high specialization, which is why they're able to charge a lot for their work, right? So that's kind of the dynamic, I think, largely. There are other factors, but that's the dynamic largely. Right. Higher specialization, less market, but more margin.
And when you talk about that, so the more specialized company, typically a smaller company, right? But very specialized. The market is not as big, so there's fewer kind of players. When you say that, what are you thinking? Are you thinking this is 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, 100 people? What do you view, just so that we kind of give everybody joining us a bit of context around, like, what does small mean in your mind?
Yeah, sure. So it could be as small as like 5 people. There are some great 5-person specialized consultancies out there, but I would still consider a small consultancy up to around that 20 mark and very specialized. Yeah. From what I would consider to be sort of standard from a margin perspective, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the SPI report.
Heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, so they do basically a big survey across, I think they usually have about 1,000 consultancies that participate. And what they say is that their standards or averages that they see is kind of in line with what we see. And that's typically a project, like an individual project, you generally want to be making sort of at least 30% margin on, 30 to 40%, depending on the nature of the work. Like I say, you do have loss leader type projects when you are trying to break into new industries. Some of it, like, you really can fudge some of the data though. Like, you might run a big internal proof of concept project to set you up for responding to a bigger RFP and not count that cost as part of the project cost. I'm not necessarily taking a stand on whether you should or shouldn't, but there are ways that you can make the margin at a project level look better. But if you're being kind of overall honest with yourself, I would say around 30%. And then 10 to 15% sort of margin at a company level is typically the sort of standard of what we see.
Have there been any outliers, like just within, of course, you can't name names and confidential and all that kind of stuff, but have there been any situations where you see a company that they're delivering engagements with 60 or 70% margins, or they're even business level, they're at 50+% margin, have a team and so forth? Like, anything kind of stand out where you're going like, oh, whoa, what are they doing here? Like, this is kind of different.
Yes, I've seen probably less of like at a project level making bigger margins on big projects anyway. Like, there are small projects where you can do that, but on large sort of government or enterprise type customer work, generally that's a little bit more. Often it's, with the bigger projects, could be open tender or there's a lot more competition. So it's where I say, where you get some of these small niche consultancies, that's where the opportunity for those larger margins is. From a company perspective, generally, like for a company with any size, you're not really pushing much beyond 20% in my experience. Yeah, there are definitely situations where it's quite a lot lower and by design. And so there are some consultancies that make kind of low margins due to not necessarily having their management sort of completely together or having other challenges. But we have some customers that are by design, they are a consultancy, but they are really more just a conglomerate of individual consultants. So they might make a very small margin off these individuals, but a lot of the time these individuals are really doing their own kind of business development and running their own projects as consultants. And the company is just providing a vehicle to make it easier for them to
Got it. So rather than kind of bringing more profit into the company, that profit is kind of going out to the individual consultants and they're almost their own little business or mini entity. That makes sense. Okay.
But they're running a much leaner overhead function. And a lot of the times people running these consultancies, they might have a consultancy of 50 consultants, but they're running that as a part-time gig and doing something else as well.
That makes a lot of sense. So just going kind of hitting the rewind button for a moment in Project Works as you built out this software, right? You've got funded, now built up a team. I think today you have about 25 or so people on the team. Now that you have that product, the software, how do you go to market? Like just kind of give us a little sense of how you've found or what you found to be most effective in kind of penetrating or getting into consulting firms, professional services firms to kind of get a seat at the table, to have a conversation, to get their interest, to ultimately kind of win business. What does that playbook look like?
That's definitely morphed over the years as we've kind of honed in what works for us. So when we started, our go-to-market was pure cold outbound. So we had just people on the phone, like dialing lists of consultancies.
How did that work?
It worked okay in the early days, but you quickly saturate, right? When you're not building any demand, you're only really tapping the small individual percentage of people who are in the market ready to buy and will take a cold call, which is a very small fraction.
Sure.
So we kind of scoop that up and that sort of saturates reasonably quickly. Where we've found the real gold is through partnerships. So through integration partners, largely actually in every situation, by the time somebody comes to look for a product like ProjectWorks, they already have an accounting system. So we're in New Zealand. Xero has been a very big New Zealand success story. That really enabled us to get some real claws in the Xero marketplace by building out the best integration with Xero.
So for those that aren't familiar, Xero, right? Think like a QuickBooks or a Sage or something along those lines. So an accounting platform software for
cloud accounting.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So
can you talk a little bit about like how that works? Because people often hear this idea of partnerships, but I think it'd be helpful if you could get a little bit more granular around like what was the value proposition when you reached out to Xero? How did you position the benefit for them, the benefit for you? Like how did that actual partnership take place? And then what does it look like today in terms of what are they doing or what are you doing and how is that structured?
Yeah. So the bad thing about partnerships is they take a lot of time to build, especially when you're a David and Goliath. They didn't know who we were or care about us, right? That's also a real strength though, because once you've put in that effort to build those partnerships, then you've got quite a good moat. It's hard for somebody else to just come in overnight and do that. So in the early days, that involved building out the integration with Xero the best. So making sure that it worked with invoices, with payments, expenses, just having the best product being listed in their marketplace. And then going to our customers and doing our own go-to-market. And as part of a new customer coming on, we'd write in and say, hey, you have to give us a good review in the marketplace. So then we could start building up reviews. And then you sort of start to get on Xero's radar. So we had connections there, luckily being in both Wellington-founded companies. A lot of people it's the same sort of tech scene. So you're kind of leaning on personal networks. You're leaning on your like official contacts within the organization. You're leaning on your product being the best. You're leaning on the reviews that you're getting, and you're really trying to attack it on a lot of different fronts. What really helped for us was Xero run, like a lot of the platforms, they run an a yearly awards event, and we managed to get awarded the Emerging App Partner of the Year. And then so that really kind of got us onto Xero's radar. But it's really it's brick by brick, the partnership stuff there.
And what does that look like today? So I understand you're on the Xero marketplace, but I would imagine that any integration or tool software could potentially plug into that marketplace. So when you talk about the real benefits of that partnership, what does that look like? Is Xero actually sending leads your way, customers your way? Just what are they actually doing that is beneficial for your company?
Yeah, so now we're kind of taking that to the next level where you have their sales team know who you are and they can recommend you. But probably the most beneficial thing is because Xero is Australia, UK, South Africa, and starting to penetrate pretty well into the US as well. It's given us that instant kind of global connection. So I don't think we've spent very few marketing dollars in the UK, and already 15% of our revenue comes from there, largely off the back of Xero.
You mentioned that 15% now of your business comes from the UK, and that's really on the back of the Xero kind of partnership. And so is it mainly like the reason why that happened is because Xero's sales team, or as a company, when people reach out to them and they might be a good fit for what you're offering, the sales team from Xero would be kind of referring people towards you? Or is there anything else that they're doing in terms of sending emails or having you on webinars or anything else that's kicking in?
I think the main benefit is being in the marketplace and 5-star reviews. People go in like they want to find a project management tool is often what they're looking for, and they find us through that rather than that. What it has done is got us on the radar of the other accounting platforms as well, though. So we've just signed this year a strategic partnership agreement with Intuit, who make QuickBooks. Your audience is probably a lot more familiar with. And they've approached us and said, hey, we've got 4 million customers still on QuickBooks Desktop that we want to kind of get to the cloud. A way to do that is by building a proper cloud network, cloud partner network. You guys are clearly the dominating one with Xero. Hey, we should talk. So these things, once you start getting there and the others start to take notice. It's a long road to really building those, but it's quite defensible once you're there. Kind
of the benefits of the network effect, right? Once it's in place, it really starts to take shape and become very powerful. So Matt, I want to first of all thank you for coming on here today, sharing some of your story, journey, and you guys are building. I want to make sure that people can learn more about software, the developments of it that you guys are doing. But before we do that, just let me ask a specific question that I like to ask guests at the end here, which is in the last 6 months, is there a book, could be fiction or nonfiction, that you have read or listened to that you would just recommend to others? Something that really resonated with you that you think might be helpful or interesting for other business owners?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one book, I've read it a while ago, but I kind of always come back to and read each year, is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz.
It's a good book. Yeah.
It's probably my favorite business book that I felt was good sort of cover to cover. A lot of business books I find, they pack it all in the first 20% and then the half of the book is sort of trailing off. But that one, I think, has good points the whole way through.
Great one. Great recommendation there. All right. Well, so again, thank you for coming on, Matt. Where's the best place for people to go? Can you share that one URL or one place that might be good for them to go and learn more?
Yeah, projectworks.io is the place to go, really. You can get a trial, have a look at what we do and sort of see if that's fit for you. And then you can book time with one of our team to sort of have a free session to chat through the requirements as well. If it doesn't look like it's a fit for you, we'll be pretty honest straight from the bat. We don't like wasting people's time. So yeah, there we go. That's the place, projectworks.io.
All right. We will link all that up in the show notes. Matt, again, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. All right. Cheers, Michael.
And that's it for today's episode between Matt and Michael. If you enjoyed today's podcast, then be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your favorite shows. And if you want to help support the Consulting Success Podcast, you can either do so by heading over to Apple Podcasts and leaving a rating and review, or sharing this episode out with a friend or colleague who you feel like would truly enjoy today's episode. Again, as a reminder, if you're looking to grow your consulting practice from 6 to the 7-figure level, then be sure to grab our free consulting blueprint by heading over to consultingsuccess.com/guide. Again, that's consultingsuccess.com/guide to grab your free copy today. Thanks for listening to today's episode. That's the end of the line for us this week. Until next time.